All right. Hey, in this video, we're going to talk about Unit 5, Lesson 1, Exploration 2, titled Factors Affecting Cell Growth. In the first exploration from Lesson 1, we looked at the different stages of the cell cycle. And in this exploration, we're going to talk about what actually causes that cell to divide. What are the different factors that go into triggering that cell cycle process? Now, there's a couple of things that influence how big a cell is going to grow, but the overall size of the cell is ultimately what's going to determine when it is time to divide. Now, when we talk about a cell's size, we usually use two quantities, surface area and volume. And it's important to understand the relationship between these two, because as a cell grows, the ratio of surface area to volume changes. And as that changes, it becomes more and more challenging for a cell to acquire what it needs. If you think about it like this, a smaller cell is not only going to have less volume, but the surface area compared to the volume is also going to be much smaller. Now, if you look at cell C compared to cell A, there is a much greater amount of volume compared to the surface area, simply because surface area grows at a different rate than volume does. Because volume is a cubed value, where surface area is a squared value, this volume number is going to increase very rapidly. And as that volume increases, the surface area can't keep up. The surface area is the only way for substances to move in and out of the cell. If you remember that, they have to cross the cell membrane. Well, as the volume increases, there simply isn't enough surface area to obtain all of the resources fast enough that cell needs to survive. So eventually, the cell reaches a certain point where it becomes too big, and it sends the signal that division needs to begin. All right. Now, this process of cell division is regulated, and that's a good thing too, because one of the major problems that can occur in our bodies is an unregulated cell division, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But there are basically two different factors that control how fast and how often your cells divide, and they can be internal and external factors. One of the external factors is something like a chemical or physical signal. This could be one cell bumping into another cell. It could be another hormone received. But basically what happens is your cell receives some sort of signal from outside that says, hey, it's time to divide. Okay. Now, when this cell divides, there's a type of protein. There's two types of proteins actually, called cyclin and kinase. And those two proteins are kind of like your gas and your brake pedal. They are either going to tell the cell we need to speed up and we need to divide faster, or we need to pump the brakes and divide slower. What can really cause problems is if these two factors get out of whack. If we have a cell that's dividing uncontrollably, sometimes that's because the hormone that tells the cell to divide gets stuck in the on position, and the hormone that tells the cell to stop stops working. It would kind of be like if you were driving a car and the accelerator got stuck in the down position where the brake lines were cut and you couldn't slow down the car at all. Obviously, that would cause problems. And again, we'll talk about that at the end here. Another important regulatory piece. When a cell divides, yes, we talked about the checkpoints. We talked about in our previous exploration how during the cell cycle, there are various checkpoints that are able to kind of just make sure that the whole process is working the way that it's supposed to. And one of the tools that is utilized by those checkpoints is something called apoptosis. Apoptosis is also known as programmed cell death. Now, this may sound bad, and you know, in some points it could be, but for the most part, apoptosis is extremely important. Cells are programmed with a self-destruct mechanism in them so that if anything happens and there's an improper chromosome, or if there's something that didn't divide properly, those cells can be terminated before they're allowed to replicate. Another application of this is in development. As you can see in this picture, when humans start out the development process, all of their fingers and toes are webbed. Well, as they grow, the webbing in between their fingers undergoes programmed cell death, undergoes apoptosis, and those cells go away, leaving us with more dexterity in our fingers and toes. Another way this is used is with leaves. If you look at a cross-section of a leaf, you'll see that there is a line of cells that are kind of close to the base of the stem. And that line of cells is specifically there to self-destruct when it's time for that leaf to fall off of a tree. As you know, trees lose their leaves in the late fall, early winter. And when it's time for that leaf to be released, those cells all kind of explode, almost like a layer of dynamite put on a bridge. And when they do that, the leaf falls off the tree and falls to the ground. And that happens because of this process called apoptosis. Now, as we discussed earlier, when you have uncontrolled cell growth or cell division, that can cause problems. Cancer is what happens when your cells are not functioning properly in the division process. When they begin to divide uncontrollably, that's what causes massive problems. What you end up getting is a group of cells that are no longer responding to regulations, and by extension, they're no longer doing their job anymore. They just become what we call a tumor. It's just a disorganized clump of cells that's only focus is to divide as fast as they can. Now, some tumors grow rapidly, some tumors don't, but all tumors are a result of uncontrolled cell growth. Now, these tumors can sometimes be removed easily, but other times it can be more difficult if they are close to a blood source. If the tumor is able to grow and those cancerous cells are able to break off into the bloodstream, they can be carried to other parts of the body. And when this happens, this is where we get into those later stage cancer diagnoses. When you talk about stage 3, stage 4 types of situations, that's where the original tumor cell has spread and has access to the bloodstream so that now those cancer cells can be carried to any other part of the body, and then they're much more difficult to treat, which obviously is bad for the person that has that happen to them. Now, these cells can become cancerous for a variety of reasons, but for the most part, what happens is some sort of a mutation in the DNA. Now, we haven't talked a lot about mutations yet, but a mutation is just anything that changes, and those changes can be caused by things like radiation, even from the sun, or they can be caused from chemical exposure, and some of them are even genetic, to where the person was born with a predisposition for that type of cancer to exist. All types of cancers, though, fall under this category of uncontrolled cell growth, which causes those cells to divide faster in an unregulated kind of a way. All right, that's it for this lesson. Make sure you go back and finalize your notes.